Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week, I am joined by Assheton Stuart Carter. Assheton is the founder and CEO of TDI Sustainability. Assheton, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Great. Yes. Thanks, Michelle. Yes, I'm Assheton Stuart Carter. I'm CEO and founder of TDI Sustainability. And I've spent the last 30 years in the extractive industries and energy supply chain.
Okay, that sounds amazing. So how did you get started off in the energy sector then?
Well, I came at it really as the name of my company would tell you, through the sustainability lens. And I think I first started I lived in the United States for 12 years. And there I worked in a environmental conservation organization. And the organization was looking at protection of biodiversity globally. And they did analysis to find out where was the biggest pressure potentially on protection of biodiversity. And the expansion of oil and gas was in some of the tropical parts of the world was one of those drivers that they thought was important. So we actually started a program called the Energy and Biodiversity Initiative, and there we had 5 of the largest oil companies and transmission companies, energy transmission companies. In those days, we had Enron before they dissolved, but we had Shell and BP and Conoco and Statoil and a few more. And we joined those with some big conservation organizations, the Fauna and Flora International in the UK, the group I work called Conservation International, Smithsonian Institution, and others. And then we sat around the table for 3 years, not literally, intermittently, and flashed and threshed out how oil and gas, rather than being seen as something which is a negative for the environmental protection, how it could actually contribute to conservation in the places where it works. So that's my first, I guess, sort of encounter. I've been working in different places ever since, from looking at the oil sands in Canada to the Middle East to parts of Africa. Yeah.
Excellent. And that sounds like an amazing career you've had. So what brought you into sustainability then?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't have a road to Damascus moment. I don't think. I mean, I think, like probably most of us, many of us have a connection to and want to see things managed well, and that we kind of look after the planet and so on. But I was always very interested in business. In fact, my first career was in the city, so I used to invest into businesses. So I guess what I did was marry those two interests, as the business side of things with the environmental and sustainability side of things. And I guess when I started this in the sort of the 90s, it was quite a new area, but it was just beginning. And so the PhD I did at Bath Uni, that was sort of one of the first programs that actually looked at business and sustainability. So there was that sort of opening, and I won a scholarship to do that. And there's the opportunity, and I guess that's where it's been ever since. Now it's more of an established discipline, I guess, corporate sustainability and business and sustainability. But even then, it was still quite new. But yeah.
Okay. Because I didn't think that sustainability had been around so long.
Yeah, no, it's been around a bit. I mean, in those days, it was kind of came out of the quality literature. So, the kind of a Deming cycle and things like that. I read a book at that time called When Good Companies Do Bad Things. Was it by someone called Corton? I can't remember now. When Good Companies Do Bad Things. And this is basically, I kind of think that was really quite, if you're a company, you don't go out there unless there's something going badly wrong inside the company. You don't go out there to purposely destroy people's lives. You go out there to create value. But what the book pointed out was that, these are companies going about their business and including oil and gas companies, energy companies, and they didn't always know whether what they were doing was unsustainable or what they're doing was going to be a negative impact because that science wasn't there or that knowledge wasn't around or it just wasn't on their radar because it hadn't come out in regulations or the expectations. So it was just sort of emerging, I think. But you're right, it was just focusing mostly on things like how do you green the office, recycle paper, share a lift into work. It wasn't really looking at supply chains and the things it's looking at now.
Okay, so do you think that sustainability has developed since the 90s then?
Yeah, I mean, well, and we're talking here, I think, about kind of corporate sustainability because there's a sustainability bit, which is, what's our knowledge about what's sustainable. And I guess one thing to note there is, Brundtland report going back then, she got it right. It's really about sustainable development, not just about, I don't think anything is sustainable unless you can change the third law of thermodynamics, but it's about whether you can develop yourself and your family and your economy in a way which is doing more good than harm. So that understanding is developed. But then also what is developed is like, what is the responsibility of business? Because the business is there to make money at the end of the day. And you've got to do that responsibly. So how far should business step into the world of what governments should be doing or civil society be doing? So both those things are developed, I think. And I think what's happened over the last couple of decades is the enthusiasm for it has kind of ebbed and waned, if you want. It's flowed, and it's sometimes it's very popular, then sometimes inflation comes, it's not so popular again. But I think what we've seen over the last 10 years is that it is beginning to become mainstream now. So it's become a sticky issue. You can't really have a conversation about corporate strategy without including ESG or corporate sustainability or whatever you want to call it. And the regulations are caught up now as well. So out of the EU, there's a flood of regulations around, and particularly around the energy markets as well, about where things come from, traceability, transparency, ethics, human rights, conflict, and all the rest of it. And out of the US, Australia, Canada, the UK. So I think for anybody looking at business now, having one of the arrows in your quiver should probably be a knowledge of what does sustainability mean for business.
Okay, so what does sustainability mean to a lot of businesses then?
Well, right at the moment, because of all these regulations coming up, it means compliance risk. And they're trying to figure out how on earth they're going to meet the expectations of these regulations. And there's that thing, and then because some of these regulations, well, many of these regulations are new, they're not very kind of mature in terms of how you implement them. So I think that compliance risk is that they've got to comply with something which is a bit vague. So that's kind of one thing. For energy developers, a lot of it is about getting access to the resource in the first place, because that's become a difficult thing to do as well. And then another part of it is reputation risk, and that's taken on a new dimension. I was speaking to a company the other day, and they were developing a new site in Eastern Europe, and it was a major company, so they'd a lot of investment into community outreach and doing their environmental impact assessments and all these things. And then they had a negative article in a major scientific journal, which they thought was very inaccurate. And so they tried to respond to that and, in the way that you should do with a peer-reviewed journal. And then what they found out was that the person who'd responded from the company had been attacked on social media, and LinkedIn and Facebook had, what do you call it, when they sort of challenge that you actually exist and you got 10 days to demonstrate that you're actually a real person and that you did get your PhD from London University or so on. And so there'd basically been a whole campaign against them in social media. So that's another element which is happening now, is that, people who oppose development are becoming savvy and more savvy than the companies themselves on how to run social campaigns and how they undermine your credibility. So it's taking off. So I think for many of them, that's how they see it. But others, on a more positive note, if they can demonstrate that they are doing things with care and responsibly, then they can establish longer term business relationships with governments and communities, and therefore be a more valuable company. But yeah, two sides.
Okay. It is. I was quite surprised that somebody would actually maybe do that to anybody, to maybe challenge that they were a real person. It,
Yeah, it happens a bit actually. And I don't understand it myself, but I think I think the way it works is if you get kind of more than so many thousand challenges, and then LinkedIn or Facebook, then they have to respond, and then you have to prove evidence that you're actually a human being, and then you are who you say you are. But if you're not ready for all that, or don't monitor your social daily, you can suddenly find yourself without an identity.
that is
Yeah,
surprising. That is really surprising. So, what do you think is the most challenging thing that you find about your job?
but my job. Well, I mean, I think we're probably all at the moment. I think we're all challenged about the state of the market and how unpredictable it is. And I guess the generation now kind of coming into jobs, they've lived in 5 years of uncertainty, so maybe they're more accustomed to it than people who aren't. But it is difficult um to forecast business cycles and so on. So that's a sort of challenging part of it. In terms of our sort of clients, I think sustainability, and that's what we're talking about. Although, I said before that it's been mainstream, so it's become a sticky topic. I still think that many C-suite executives don't realize how important it is becoming in terms of their kind of reputation and longevity, and quite often they're caught out. So actually trying to make the case for why it's important. Another very difficult thing I think in our world is, we talk about sustainability and it's a concept. And for many engineers in the which oil and gas industry is a technical industry. And, you know, how do you quantify it? So that's another thing. So a lot of it is about data and how do you get the right data and what do you do with that data? That's another thing. Yeah.
Okay, that does sound. And how do you overcome that then?
Well, on the data front, I mean, data is actually something I've been working with for kind of quite a long time, and I think it's fascinating. But you, I with any sort of scientific thing, it's about getting consensus. That's when you've reached an understanding of something where many people agree with you. So you have to keep on making your case and persisting when things come through and it resonates. So I think there's a sort of a persistence thing there. But most of all, I think in my world is you've got to be, when you're dealing with companies and sustainability, you've got to be really straightforward. You're not a campaigner. We're not environmental campaigners. We got to give them the facts as we know them, and we got to, as a consultant, you got to put yourself in the shoes of your client and give them information that they're going to be able to use in their everyday jobs. I think that's, essentially the thing we've got to do. That's our skill.
Okay, so what do you find most enjoyable about your career?
Like, well, I think, you've got a choice. You know, I work for companies. I work for obviously with the consultants, work close to governments and academia as well. And there's trade-offs in all of them. I think probably the trade-off between being in a company, a large company, hopefully you're getting some security. And if it's a big company, you've got a few choices you can do. But if you're in my world and you're in sustainability, that for an energy company, that's not the core business. The core business is generating or delivering energy in some way, and so you're never going to be in the kingpin. And there's a trade-off with steadiness is that you don't get the stimulation. With a consultancy, you do many different things, so you're continuously stimulated. There's always something new happening. There's always a new challenge. So if you're that sort of person, then I think is what should that's what keeps you going. What's next? Give me something else. I want to be intellectually stimulated. Give me the next challenge.
Okay, I was going to ask you, do you think it's harder because you obviously are CEO, founder? of your own company. Do you think it's harder taking the leap of faith to start your own company rather than work for someone else?
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've got kids in their 20s, and I wonder where now the risk lies because I see even big companies lay people off, and sometimes quite dramatically, especially with the extractive industries, and there's boom and bust cycles. So I'm going, what is really secure? I guess to me, if you can learn early on that you're going to be able to survive whatever happens to you, um, then starting your own company is one way to learn that and fast. So in some ways, I kind of think it's more risky working for a large company when you don't control the destiny of what's happening and you're just a number. But yeah, it does take confidence. You've got to have something to offer. So you've got to build up those skills and that knowledge. And that very often comes from working from a big company as well. And many big companies are superb places to work and they really look after their people. And you can have three or four careers within one major company. So, I think that's also a tremendous opportunity.
So, how do you go about getting your clients when you're starting up by yourself?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, it's, people you worked with before and its reputation. And when you start up by yourself and you let it known that you're looking for opportunities, and people then open up to you like they haven't before because you're in a different context. So it starts like that. It starts with people you know. But in consultancy, you're really only good as your last project, one bad project, and that can threaten everything. But one project leads to another. And then it's with us, mostly it's word of mouth. But yeah, we are starting to do more aggressive advertising, I guess. Well, aggressive is probably the wrong word, but more intensive campaigns. But yeah, you've got to turn up, you've got to be there. And I think in business, as you know, I'm sure it's really comes down to meeting people and conversations and building that rapport and building trust. In the day, you can have as many contracts as you want, but in the end of the day, it's a trust relationship that you've got to build, that you can deliver, you have the competence, and you're going to find a solution to the problem you're trying to solve.
Okay, but is it hard to build trust?
It's certainly getting harder nowadays. I think we seem to be in a low risk environment. Yeah, I mean, with you normally kind of start small, so people will test you on a small thing. Well, it's necessarily hard, but it's you've got to have integrity. That means you've got to be there and continue to be there. And I think actually trust is also a very human thing. So you have to meet people. That's certainly become more difficult as the pandemic kind of turned things upside down. People don't go to offices or meetings as they used to. But yeah, so there's a human relationship, I think, there you got to build in business.
Okay, but do you think it is harder to meet people now than it ever has been?
Yeah, I think it has become like that. Although what you read now is that, there has been a little bit kind of a surge in people going back to offices and going to things, and now conferences are beginning to open up again as well. But yeah, it has become a little bit harder. And, within the energy industry, these big facilities are also quite empty because they're so automated, which is also kind of interesting. So you go to some of these plants and they're 70% automated. So there's not many people around.
Okay, have you ever had any career disasters?
Well, I mean, I think anybody in their career is always going to come up across a boss which they're going to have difficulty with. That's so I think I wouldn't say if I did, I'm not sure I'd tell you what the disaster was. But I guess if I'm drawing all my experience on relationships is, you know, even if you're in the right and the other person's in the wrong, if they're your boss, the best thing might be to circumvent them. So I think those are in people's careers, that's a disaster. I don't think I've had any project which has gone really badly wrong. No, I don't think that's happened to me. And normally we're kind of brought in as a consultant, to prevent those things happen or after it. But I'm sure you interview many people and they have like in the oil and gas and industry, they have got unbelievable responsibility with projects on projects worth multi-billions of dollars. And they must live in, keep them up at night, knowing that they have responsibility to make sure those things work.
Yeah. So, have you ever ran a multi-billion pound project?
Not $1 billion, no. No, no, I haven't done that. Millions of dollars, but not billions of dollars. But it's I guess in the day it's zeros, isn't it? But but you can look at these projects. I'm sure you've been to them, and it's quite phenomenal. Yeah. What do
So,
you
what
think?
would your advice be for any younger graduates, maybe even just working on that type of project? Because it is quite daunting.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's lots of things which are daunting. Doesn't mean you don't do them. It's, in life you've got to participate, haven't you? So you got to, do your best and participate. If you had the opportunity to work on a multi-billion-dollar project with some responsibility, onshore or offshore, why wouldn't you grasp it? It'd be something you'll remember for the rest of your life. That'd be amazingly stimulating while everybody else is sitting around behind their desks.
Yeah, I do agree, actually. I do. And do you think that it is important to just grab opportunities as they come up?
Yeah, as long as they're not as long as you're not doing it frivolously. I mean, I always accept projects. I wouldn't accept a project that I didn't think I could do, but that doesn't mean that I know how to do it exactly from day one. But I know that I've got the resources and creativity to figure out how to do it. So yeah, for sure, you shouldn't be foolhardy and go into a project that you know you can't complete or a job that you can't perform at. But should you challenge yourself every day?
But can you not, even if you were going to take a job that was a step up, and you might think it might be too soon, do you think it's still wise to take the leap? Because
Well,
you
I
could
think
be,
only you know that, isn't it? And I guess when I was, as I started my career, as I said, in the city, so as a stockbroker, and when you're looking at the markets and you're taking you basically want to invest on a stock price, the best bit of advice I got is like, first of all, you got to know yourself. If you're a naturally cautious person, then you need to push yourself to take a few more risks. But if you're naturally a little bit more risk tolerant, then you need to be a bit more conservative. So I think the first thing is get to know your nature, and then you'll be able to make that judgment call when it comes.
okay. So do you think that the oil industry or the energy sector in general can become more sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's when you look at what do we mean by sustainability, is a question you asked at the beginning. With the oil and natural gas, of course, what everybody is doing is looking at how the product is used. And so for sure, burning oil and natural gas isn't sustainable for the planet. But if you also look at how the operations and the projects are run and managed, that's also to do with sustainability because it's like how you manage your footprint in the place where you're actually extracting the oil, how you treat the people around you. So in that part, yes, absolutely. And in some ways, the oil and gas industry has led the way because they're the ones, if you think about it, if you're an electronics company sitting in Seattle, you all you got to do is look after the people in your office. If you're a oil and gas major operating in a forest in the middle of South America, if you want to continue to do that, you got to find ways to work with the local communities and with the government. Because if you don't, you won't have an asset. So in fact, they've been forced to understand how to work with their neighbors and how to treat things properly for far longer than many of the companies that we see in our capital cities. So in that respect, it is. And then, of course, you've got the whole renewable sector as well. So the renewable sector we work a lot in because they rely on minerals. And so you might have a solar panel or a wind turbine, and that generates clean energy. But the inputs to build your solar panel, you require polysilicon, which could come from Xinjiang in China, which is associated with forced labor. Could get copper. in the wires, which comes from the Congo, which is associated with conflict and human rights. In the wind turbine, you can have a magnet which comes from rare earth elements, which are all made in China. You've got different challenges. You've substituted, or you've replaced a challenge to do with the use of the energy, how your product is used to the inputs. But there's always going to be these challenges, and I think that's where we need to get the creativity, and creativity is what drives productivity and human ingenuity. So.
Excellent answer. So, is there anything that you still want to achieve in your career then?
Yeah, lots more. I mean, one reason why I got into this career is whether it's achievement or not, was because it takes you off on adventures, right? And I think I've been to 64 countries. Next week I'm going to Tanzania, then I'm going to Mongolia, then I'm going to China, then I'm going to Saudi Arabia. So yeah, I'd love to continue doing that, seeing different parts of the world and bringing what I've learnt to those projects and people that I meet. I think that's for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Is travel quite important to you then?
Yes, I love travel. Yeah. Yeah. I've always have. My parents had spent a part of their life traveling, and yeah, I got the bug early on. And if you look around, what are the careers that you can get into that allow travel? Certainly the extractives and the energy industry is one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it's important in your career to travel?
Yeah, because it's for different perspectives, and I think you can never really understand a different point of view or a different setting unless you go there and you walk it. You can learn so much from just spending a day in a different place that you'll never learn from YouTube or from a Teams chat. So yeah, you've got to go out there and you've got to listen to people and really try and understand the world from their perspective. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I agree as well. So I'm going to maybe ask you one final question. If you could turn back time, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Ah, good question. Probably actually for the generation you're talking to, it doesn't really mean very much because they might have already done that. But I think it comes down for, confidence in finding out what you want and asking for it. But I think maybe the generation where your audience is more aware of that. But it took me a long time to I lived in America for 12 years, and in America, if you don't ask for what you want, they generally don't think that you want it. When in kind of Europe and the UK, somehow there's supposed to be some sort of subliminal secret messaging that people are supposed to receive to understand what you want. So I think you need to figure out what you want as soon as you can, and then go and ask for it.
I think that's good advice. I think it's amazing advice. So maybe one final question with all your years of experience. What advice would you give a young graduate wanting to maybe pursue a career in sustainability?
Sustainability. Well, I think you've got to pick a technical discipline because there's a lot of sustainability. When I look around when we're recruiting people, and there's a lot of people who work for the big consultancies that come to us, and we find that they haven't got the depth. They haven't got that vertical depth in something. They know the words, they can do a report, they can do the external affairs. So I think, if you can ground yourself in at least one technical aspect, whether it's, geophysical, to do with water or engineering or something, that's going to be an extremely strong, arrow in your quiver. And then you can layer on the other things as well.
No, that's amazing advice. So that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Assheton for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening and see you next week.